record it,
Okay.
and let's get started. So let me share the source sheet. Everyone see that?
No.
Yes.
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 Okay. All right, so we are in Parshat Shoftim, which is it's every parsha is a great parsha. One of the major themes of Parshat Shoftim is the theme of leadership. We encounter that in a few different places. So the parsha opens, Shoftim v'shotrim titein lecha b'chol she'arecha, asher Hashem Elokecha noten lecha lishpartecha v'shaftu et ha'am mishpat tzedek. You shall appoint, it's translated here as magistrates and officials for your tribes in all the settlements that Hashem your Lord is giving to you for your tribes, and they will govern the people with due justice. Okay, so we have here the identification of two different leadership positions, Shoftim and Shotrim. Again, translated as magistrates and officials. Shofet in modern Hebrew we translate as a judge. And shoter in modern Hebrew is a police officer, an officer. And we're familiar with the position of Shofet from the book of Shoftim, which again in English, how do we translate that? What's that book known as in English?
Judges.
The book of Judges. So whether a shofet was actually a judge is a big question that a lot of the academics and the Farshim have. It seems it was more of some sort of political leadership position that might have had an element of judgeship as well. But we have Shoftim and Shotrim. Later on in the Parsha, we encounter what's called Parshat HaMelech, the Torah's description of a king, a Jewish king. Source number 2. Ki tavo el haaretz asher Hashem Elokecha noten lach, v'yarashta v'yashavta ba, v'yamarta asima alai melech k'chol hagoyim asher skivotai. When you come to the land which Hashem your Lord is giving to you, and you inherit it, or you conquer it, and you settle in it, and you say, I want to appoint for myself, I want to appoint a king like all the nations around me. Som tasim alecha melech, asher yibchar Hashem Elokecha bo, mikerev achecha titasim alecha melech, lo tuchal latet alecha ish nochri asher lo achicha hu. So you shall surely place for yourself a king whom God will choose. From amongst your brothers you shall appoint a king. You cannot appoint a non-Jew or a foreigner or a stranger who is not your brother. So there's a lot of a discussion about the king. Right, one major question is the king the preferred form of leadership? Why would that question arise from what we've read in the pasuk?
Their motivation in wanting a king or is not necessarily judged later by Shmuel to be the best motivation for having a king.
Maybe even not even judged by God, right?
Yeah, right.
Right. What the reason it says that you want a king is because you want to be like the other nations around you. Yeah. And even before, even putting that aside, it says the amarta asima alai melech. Right. It's coming from the people. So we have a similar conundrum, right? The story of the spies. What were the spies sent at God's directive or at the people's directive initiative? So it seems that the king is sort of at the initiative or the directive or the discretion of the people. And maybe Hashem is kind of giving in and saying, okay, well, if you want a king, so you need to follow these criteria on how to choose the king. I think last year we saw the continuation of these psukim where it says, Lo yarbelo nashim, v'lo yarbelo susim, that the king cannot have an overabundance of wives or of horses, which is one of the sources for the great topic of Ta'amei HaMitzvot, whether we're able to look into the meaning or the rationale behind the mitzvot. But here we're going to focus on a different element of the description of the king, which is the Midrash Halacha in Sifrei, source number 3. Som tasim alecha melech, melech velo malka. The Midrash tells us a king and not a queen.
There was
that
a
mean-
queen.
right,
There was
there-
a queen in our tradition, though.
There certainly were, right? I mean, if we define, if the queen is the wife of the king, so I think every Jewish king had at least one queen, if not 1,000 queens. But we also had queens who had ruling capacity, right?
Yes,
Um,
Shalom.
Shalom Zion, right? So, historical record seems to say that we did not. This Sifrei was not followed, and it becomes the source of a great topic of discussion in the halachic literature. Before we get to Shalom Zion or any of the queens, a question arises from earlier in Tanakh, which is that we have many significant women who seem to have some leadership capacity or some sort of power. But we have explicitly in Sefer Shoftim, in the book of Judges, the character of Devorah. What does the Torah tell us about Devorah? Source number 4. Udvora isha neviah eshet lapidot hi shofta et Israel ba'etahi. Devorah was a prophetess. She was the wife of Lapidot, and she judged, or she was the shofetet. She was the shofet, whether that means a judge or some political leadership position, but she held that position over the Jewish people in that time. Yoshevet tachat tomer Devorah bein harama ubein Beitel b'har Ephraim v'ayu eleha b'nei Yisrael la'mishpat. She sat under a palm tree between Ramah and Beit El on the Mount of Ephraim, and the Jewish people came to her for decisions, for judgment.
She seems to be more of a queen than a judge.
Okay, so maybe. Right, so the book of Shoftim precedes the time in history when there was the Jewish king. So whoever was leading at that time was in some sense a king, but right, it was not officially a king, and maybe not with the same exact powers as a king, because we have the whole debate when in Sefer Shmuel about when they say explicitly we want our leader to be a king, and then right, is that seen as a rejection of Hashem or not? So she's not, right, any Jewish leader at this time period is not a king. They might have the same function that a king would later have. We have a tradition in the Gemara that says that Moshe was a melech, Moshe was a king. That was certainly preceding any of this. But right, what she was certainly more than, I'll say, just a judge. She had clear military power and capacity, and she was the leader at that time.
Who appointed her in that position?
Yeah, so that's a great question. No, with all of the Shoftim, none of them were really appointed. They just kind of emerge onto the scene, generally by some military means or having some other distinction. So we're told that she was a prophetess. So they must have known and recognized her as having prophetic capacity, and maybe that's what gave rise to her power. But no one there was no official appointment. It seems that this was sort of not that there was an election, but this was a democratic process that the people chose to have her as their leader.
And women were respected and able to just move into that position? It was that much of an egalitarian
It seems so.
society back then?
It seems so. I mean, she's the
Uh-huh.
only woman shofetet that we had. Clearly, she was exceptional. But certainly on the pshat level, there's no one seemed to have any issue with her serving in this capacity. I say on the pshat level because there are those who want to say that maybe both in a traditional commentary and also more academic lens, part of the critique of the Jewish people is that Devorah seems to have been the most capable of all the Shoftim. And so it's very clear that this is some sort of literary criticism of Bnei Israel, that the only really effective leader was a woman, right? There wasn't the quote normal leader. So there is a lot of discussion, but certainly on the surface, she was accepted without any real protest. So it seems. But it's a good question, right? So we have one source, the Elia Rabbah, that sort of questions that, or wants to know how it was that she could have risen to this capacity. What was so great about Devorah that she merited to be the shofet, the judge? And she prophesied for them. Hello, Pinchas ben Elazar Omed, right? They say there was a better candidate to serve as the leader, Pinchas, right? The same Pinchas from Chumash, who we have a tradition that says he didn't die or he lived for a very long time. So the Medrash responds, Me'idani alai et hashamayim v'et ha'aretz, I swear by heaven and earth, bein goy ubein Yisrael, ben ish uben isha, bein eved ben shivcha, hakol lefi ma'aseh she'oseh kein kach ruach hakodesh shoreh Allah. Right? Whether a Jew or a non-Jew, a man or a woman, a servant or a maidservant, everything is according to one's capacity. And according to however spiritually strong a person is, that determines whether the divine inspiration will fall on them or not. Okay, so it seems that it was a meritocracy in some sense, according to that source. But if we move further along, the Tosfot in several places where the Gemara is talking about the status of women serving in some sort of capacity, and a halachic capacity, the Tosfot raised the question of Devorah. So the first instance is talking about a process of conversion, and the fact that conversion requires tefillah b'mikvah, immersion in the mikvah, and they're discussing in the Gemara whether what exactly that means and who has to serve as witnesses, and there's a whole debate whether it's has to be a based in of 3 or whether one expert judge can serve as the judge for a convert. And the Gemara, in the course of this question, asks, well, a woman convert would have been to the mikveh anyway because she would have immersed herself when she was a nida. Right, putting aside the question of when would she have done so if she's not Jewish and she wants to become Jewish, non-Jews didn't have to immerse for nida. But the Gemara assumes that a woman would have gone to mikveh at some point, and so the Tosfot says, "Tema da amar lakaman de gertz shlosha de mishpakative." Right, it says, well, even if a woman would have gone to the mikveh to immerse herself for being a nida, that wouldn't work for conversion because conversion requires either a beit din of 3 or an expert judge of 1. And we have a concept. Right? Women certainly would not bring a man with her when she was going for a normal immersion in the mikveh. And a woman is not fit to serve as judge because there's a principle, only those who are fit to testify are fit to serve as judges. Right, and we know that women cannot serve as witnesses. Again, that's a topic for a different shir, but that we have to take as a given. Udivora, okay, so given that women cannot serve as judges and can't serve, right? So how could, so you need to have a formal immersion in front of a beis din. There's a whole other question about what the proper procedure is for a female convert to immerse herself in a modest way in the presence of a beis din, and that's a whole other topic, again, for another time. But then at the end, Tosfot says, well, wait a second, we just said that women can't serve as judges, but we have a woman judge. We had Devorah. So what are we gonna say about Devorah? Devorah lo hayita dana ela milamedet. Devorah was not serving as an official judge. Whatever she did was not giving deen, was not giving strict legal rulings. She was teaching. Milamedet lahen sheyadunu. She was teaching them what the proper ruling would be or what they should do. Inami al pia dibor shani. Or alternatively, well, Devorah was a prophet. She was clearly chosen by God and was made known to everyone. So if a woman is chosen by divine command, that's different than a normal case. But so the principle remains that a woman cannot serve as a judge, and Devorah was somehow an exception to this rule because she was serving, she was judging based on what God told her directly, or she wasn't really serving as a judge, she was serving as some sort of master teacher.
Well, was she serving the term judge for secular matters? That
Right. So that's that.
or was it halachic?
So the question Tosfot's asking is, it seems that she was serving for halachic matters, right? Meaning that's what the pasuk told us, that the Jewish people came to her for judgment. Right? We could say that she was not dealing with halachic matters, but it's also not clear that the Gemara and Tosfot would have made such a distinction, because what we think of judicial matters are halachic matters.
Well, in today's environment, we would call that role rabbi.
Right, but meaning you could go to beis din for what we would a lot of any matter that would be dealt with in a secular court, business dealings, etc., could and ideally should be dealt with by beis din.
Yeah.
So the assumption is that Devorah was when it says that they came to her for judgment, it was in that beis din type of capacity.
Right. Okay.
Could
she function? Excuse me. Could she function as an arbitrator? That is, the parties involved would accept that we will do what you tell us is right after you hear how we argue our cases.
Yeah, so we'll get there. We'll get there in a moment. That's another possibility. That it's. But let's just look at the progression of sources. So we have a second Tosfot, source number 7, commenting again on this in a totally different context, but again raises the question about women. Since women can't serve as witnesses, women cannot serve as judges. And in the second line, it again asks about Devorah. V'hadichti v'hi shofta et Yisrael. Ika lemeimar shehayta melamedet lahem dinim. So he again says that, well, one possibility is that she was serving as a teacher and not as an official judge. Inami lefi shehayta neviah hayu mekablim ota alehem. Alternatively, and this is slightly different than what we saw previously, this is more what Robert is alluding to, since she was a prophetess, they accepted her upon themselves. Meaning a woman maybe can't serve as an appointed judge, but if all parties in the matter agree to her serving as the judge or the arbitrator, then maybe that would be acceptable. Right? In the same way, right, that generally you can't have relatives serve as a judge in a case, but if both parties in the case agree that a Karov, a relative, can be a judge, so then it's acceptable. Okay, so a few possibilities. Number one is, even though Devorah seems to have functioned as a judge, it wasn't really a judge. She was just a teacher, or she was some sort of consultant to the official judges. Number two, she was clearly chosen by God for this role, and it might have allowed her to serve as a real full judge, but that would not serve as a precedent for any other woman. Or thirdly, at this point, that it was sort of in the role of an arbitrator, that if everyone accepts her, then it would be okay. That she can't, her decisions can't be imposed on others if they don't buy into it. That's where we are so far. And now we're going to see the Sefer Chinuch, who is again talking about various roles and issues with Beis Din. And he also raises the question, Al yakshe alecha, and someone please tell me when I have to scroll down in the English. Al yakshe ve'necha masha ketuv b'torah b'devar hanavi'ah v'hi shoftat Yisrael. So again, same question Tosfot asks. Don't be troubled by the fact that we read that Devorah served as a shofetet, that she judged the Jewish people. If Sharlanu l'tarit shelo haya hadin nechtach al piha, we could say that the edict wasn't issued by her mouth, meaning she might have said what the ruling should be, but that wasn't what made it official, right? It had to be officially declared by a recognized judge. She was an educated person, and so they would deliberate with her. Even concerning ritual matters. So therefore it says that she was a judge, but it wasn't that she was an official judge. She was someone that the judges would consult with. Or as Robert had suggested and Tosfot alluded to, if everyone accepted her as a judge, so then in the role as an arbitrator, she could give a ruling. Because when it comes, if the judge is accepted by both parties, then everyone agrees that it is acceptable. Then he goes on to say, and not even all the commentators agree that women cannot serve as judges. That itself is a machlokes among the authorities, and so there is a minority opinion that says women in fact can serve as judges. And we're not going to get too deep into that. That could be a separate topic. But he gives a number of explanations for how it was possible that Devorah served in this capacity. Either that, again, just like Tosfot, that she was a master teacher. Number two, that she was accepted by all parties as an arbitrator. And so therefore they allowed her to, they accepted her ruling, even though it wasn't in the role of a judge. And this is the key source moving forward. The next source, the Rambam. So the Rambam tells us in Hilchot Melachim, we start, right? Remember when we saw the verse about the king, it says, Lo tuchal lateit lecha ish nocher. You can't put a foreigner, a non-Jew, to serve as king. So the Rambam in Halacha 4, begins his discussion of who's qualified or who's disqualified to serve as king by talking about the restriction against non-Jews. Ein ramidin melech mikahal gerim, afilu achar kama dorot, ad shetia imo miYisrael. So we don't appoint a king from among converts, even going back several generations, but it must be a full-blooded Jew. As it says, you cannot appoint a foreigner who is not your brother. So the Rambam now says it's not only when it comes to king that we're not allowed to appoint a non-Jew or convert, but for all srarot, all authoritative appointments among the Jewish people. Lo sar tzava, lo sar chamishim, lo sar asara, neither as the general in the army or one of the officials of, the overseer of 10 judges or of 50 judges. Even the official appointed to allocate water when the fields are being watered. And there's no need to even say that a judge or a nasi, a president, a political ruler should only be from a Jew. As it says, from your brothers, the king should be appointed. All appointments can only come from amongst your brethren. And then now he continues. Alecha melech velo malka. Similarly, we cannot appoint a woman as in a position of kingship, as it says, you shall appoint for yourself a king, melech velo malka, a king and not a queen, as we saw in the Sifrei. So similarly, any appointments among the Jewish people can only be a man and not a woman. Okay, so this becomes the key source for any discussion moving forward about the halachic validity of women serving in any leadership capacity. Is this Rambam? Okay, so does anything strike you as interesting about this Rambam or of note?
He's extrapolating from the word king to any position in Israel. for one
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, so right, so where does he get this from, right? The Sifrei is very clear, Melech below Malka. Doesn't say anything about any other position.
What's that source again that says king but not a queen?
That's the Sifrei. That's the Midrash Halacha, which has the same basic authority as the Gemara, same time period, same basic standing as the Gemara.
It's ironic that the word Sererut, well, what if her name is even Sarah? She still
Yeah.
couldn't serve, you know?
Yeah,
I mean, it's like, that's the root of the word Sarah.
Yeah. So right, so the Rambam,
And
Really?
Yisrael as well.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
the Rambam really is a das yachid. He really is a singular opinion where he extrapolates from this Sifrei to all other positions of authority. Okay, so I know, again, it's the Rambam. The Rambam is a significant figure in the tradition. He's not to be taken lightly, but he is a singular opinion here. And then the question becomes, well, how much weight does this singular opinion get in our discussion about leadership?
At that time, did Jews have significant positions?
At which time?
In the Goyish society, like the Christian society?
Not in the Christian society. So Rambam is a product of the Muslim world, right?
In the Muslim.
In the Muslim world at that time, yes, Rambam himself was quite a recognized figure. Within Muslim society, up until the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, Jews were very well respected and did have very high positions, right? We read about the Abarbanel, who was an advisor to the king of Portugal, but then was expelled along with all the other Jews. But yeah, there was what we call the golden age of Spain, where things were quite, relations were very good between Jews and Muslims. Within the Christian world, no, there was no such thing as a Jew having a position of any authority or leadership. Okay, so that this Rambam becomes quite a significant source. And I wanted to spend some more time, and I see in 3 minutes we're going to be kicked off and we'll log back in. Okay, so everyone just click on the link again and we'll go through. But I wanted to look primarily at Rav Moshe Feinstein. Rav Moshe Feinstein discusses various issues of women serving as leaders.
1 second, Elliot, which link? The one that you sent earlier this morning?
Not the one from this morning, the same one that you clicked on to get where you are. If you're with
Okay.
us now, the same link you clicked on.
Okay.
Okay. And I think I can put it back in once we're kicked off, the chat won't matter. So Rav Moshe Feinstein deals with many questions. And even more recently, we have an added layer to this discussion, which is that there are now Orthodox institutions that are ordaining women with smicha, right? So some of these women are choosing to identify themselves with the title of rabbi. Some are specifically not identifying themselves with the title of rabbi. And a lot of those discussions also are based on what we're going to see in Rav Moshe's discussion. We're not going to be able, there's Yeshivat Maharat, which is really the leading institution for women's smicha, has a whole set of articles and contemporary responsa on the issue. Later on in the source sheet, there is a link to their page for anyone that would like to look a little bit more. And I included, just based on the length, the shortest English tshuva that they have published on their website. I included in the source sheet to just give you a sense of how some of these, how some poskim are dealing with the question. But this is still very much a live issue in the Orthodox world. Not only when it comes to questions of women as serving as rabbis or spiritual leaders, but in regard to many shuls still have issues with women serving in various positions on the shul board, specifically president. Right? In Israel, there are still, there are Haredi parties that will not allow women to be on their candidates list for Knesset. So it's still an issue. It's still a live issue, and so what we'll see is will be some ways in which it's approached. Again, this is primarily Rav Moshe Feinstein, very significant figure, but not by no means not the only posek who deals with such questions. But he's sort of a mainstream, and he'll give us a sense for where it can go and how it can be dealt with. I will start reading this. We're under a minute until this Zoom ends. So again, when we get kicked off, just log back in and we'll continue. So the first tshuva of Moshe Feinstein, I'll give you the English. He's dealing with a case of a widow. There's a woman whose husband was a mashkiach. Her husband served as a kosher supervisor, and he died, leaving behind his wife and several children. I'm not sure how many. He doesn't say how many children. And she's known to be a frum woman, a knowledgeable woman. And so the rabbi, writing to Rav Moshe, Rav Aaron Pupka, asks if this woman can assume her husband's position as mashkiach and provide supervision for whatever restaurant or factory he was the supervisor for.